taper and how the Fed actually tapered dovishily?
Yeah, so you actually have done more research. I mean, I've been pretty much all today. I was focused on that thing. So like I caught some of Gammon talking about that. I didn't even have any notes on my sheets from yesterday about tapering. So Josh, maybe you take the lead on this and I play the foil.
Yeah, sounds good. Let's just kind of run through it again because I think that definitely helps. So,
okay.
Well, basically, the market was pricing in a Fed taper, but they actually tapered more dovishly than what was expected. So they're cutting QE down from 100 down $15 billion a month, which is pathetic. That's still I want to see the exact numbers. Do you know how much QE was before? Was it 120?
I think Manarino said it went from 120 to 90, but like what Manarino said on his video was like, listen, they just simply said this is the minimum, that not maximum, minimum. So they decreased the minimum. Like Manarino,
that's still more than QE3. Like QE3, which was the most amount of quantitative easing of all time. This is going to cause massive inflation.
Yeah,
that is more than QE3 still.
Yeah, so I guess what I would say, like, I mean, like right off the bat, like my questions are going to involve saying, well, listen, if they're not going to cap the maximum, and I don't think they've capped the maximum, we could say, yeah, we're reducing the minimum purchase to $10 per month. I mean, okay, well, if you're still
yeah, but also, I kind of want to go into how little QE actually does, because it really does nothing. It's pure like QE alone does absolutely nothing. But I'm just gonna get a sip of water first.
Gotcha. So I think one of the ways I might be able to help with that is talking about asset swaps. And I think the other thing to reference is that
you want to see how much alcohol there is here for like the meetup this weekend or whatever?
Yep. COVID medication.
Yeah,
so
I mean, this is just for like a bunch of rich dudes getting together for the weekend. So this weekend I'll be racing NASCARs, going to Kiyosaki's house. It'll be a fun weekend.
Nice. Okay.
But I definitely want to go into the conversation of what quantitative easing actually does, because it's just the Fed printing bank reserves, but that doesn't actually affect the stock market. Like there's the argument that I actually make quite a bit that it influences banks to then lend to hedge funds because they think it's more bullish for the stock markets, and then these hedge funds take that money and put into the stock market. But you still need that third party. You need the banks to lend to the hedge fund to put into the stock market. Alone, QE does nothing except for potentially lower interest rates. And I would say the Fed is becoming a bigger and bigger buyer. Bigger and bigger portion of the treasury market the longer this goes on. But it's still, the market is still much more powerful than the Fed right now until until they like flat out do yield curve control or something like that.
Yeah.
The market is still much more powerful.
Gotcha. So that gets my sense. What did Gammon say? Because this might be a point to reference too. When a bank buys a bond, or excuse me, when a bank buys a treasury, or when the government buys a treasury, which is the one that makes a difference? Which is the one that doesn't make a difference? I can never remember.
It's when the Fed buys a bond that the treasury issues, that's when money's created. But
so it has to be a new bond issued by the treasury is what I hear you saying.
Yes, because the treasury is the government's checking account. And that's actually when then the treasury takes that money and puts it into the real economy, which is creating money. But when they buy it from a bank, it does not create money.
Okay, gotcha. That's just an asset swap then, right?
Just an asset swap, correct.
Okay.
And then it's up to the banks to lend, but there's no actual restriction on the banks right now because they're flush with reserves.
Yeah. Okay.
And there was all right.
Okay, so tapering. So market has priced in QE. You talk about the mechanics of QE, maybe talking about the asset swap, who's buying. Josh, what other points did you want to hit?
How QE affects the stock market.
Oh, right.
But that would be before we go into the fundamentals of QE, because to understand how quantitative easing affects the stock market, you have to understand how QE works.
Okay.
And then how the Fed is still doing more QE now than QE3, which was supposedly the most amount of asset purchases of all time. So they're tapering dovishly, and the stock market loved it, at least today. Something else that I thought was interesting is I saw a Zero Hedge article where the market has priced in like a 77% chance of the Fed raising interest rates by June of 2022 or something like that. So a few months away, they'll be done with QE and actually hiking rates, which I think the probabilities of are extremely low, and that could be putting downward pressure on gold, because gold, if there's a 77% chance that the Fed's going to hike rates, that's downward pressure on gold. But if you just look at the government's balance sheet, they just can't hike rates because they wouldn't be able to service their debt.
Gotcha. Okay. I've got some notes here. Good.
All right. 3, 2, 1. How the Fed actually wait 1 second. We're gonna redo that.
Blooper.
3, 2. How the Fed actually tapered dovishily. And I know what you might be saying. What? And a few years ago, we were hearing about the taper tantrum, and the market was freaking out because the Fed lowered QE. No. First off, what is a taper? Right now, I mean, the Fed was buying whatever amount of $1 billion worth of QE, which is just an asset swap to the banks. Now they just lowered the amount that they're buying. So it's really, oh fuck,
I've got an idea. Just let me get you started, and I think once I
you need to get started. But it really, since the title is going to be how the Fed tapered dovishily, just kind of start off with that and then go from there. Just start me off, please.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. How the Fed tapered fuck. 1, 2, 3. How the Fed tapered dovishily today. Josh, today we're going to talk about the Fed tapering, and we're going to talk about quantitative easing and kind of what it means. So I'll let you take it away.
Okay. So the Fed was buying 100 and something billion. Like this is where I'm confused, Justin. Because
okay. Let me do some research.
The Fed is they're printing bank reserves and then buying bonds from the banks. I just want to get the numbers, or I won't feel right.
Yeah. I'm looking for them right now. What's this? FT. Fed to start winding back 120 billion a month stimulus program. Josh, do you have like a sheet of paper you can scratch some notes on real quick? You can't see this like right here underneath the camera. Like here's something going down. I've got my cheat sheet to take a look at.
I do not exactly.
Do you have a printer? Like where's the office printer? Just like grab a sheet.
There's no office printer.
Well, just rip some sheetrock off the wall. Jesus Christ. Okay. So figure out a way to, or just bust out your phone. Just bust out notes on your phone and just do like a text to yourself or something. But here are the numbers. 120 billion is what they're currently at.
Before today.
Yeah. So they were at 120 billion. They went down to,
I thought they only tapered 15 billion. That'd be 105 billion still.
They pledged to reduce its purchase of treasury securities by 10 billion a month, and the central bank will also reduce its purchase of agency-backed mortgage securities by 5 billion. So they're going down by 15 billion.
Yeah.
Okay. Josh, you may want to put this in their thing. Process is set to begin mid-November, and Blah, 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 blah. Okay, do you feel confident with those numbers to get started?
Yeah. All right.
Okay, do you want me to get started and kick it off to you?
Yeah.
Okay, 3, 2, 1. Josh, today, Wednesday, November 3rd, the Fed actually announced tapering. What does this mean?
Yeah. Well, first off, what is tapering? Right off the bat, you might be thinking of the taper tantrum from a few years ago, but that is not exactly what happened today. The Fed actually managed to taper dovishily. What does this mean? So the Fed was buying $120 billion worth of quantitative easing, just asset swaps with banks where they're printing bank reserves in exchange for securities. But now they're going to reduce that to 105 billion. Wow, that is such a big deal. But let's think about that though. QE3 was 80 or 90 billion dollars a month of QE, and that was an absolute astronomical amount of quantitative easing. It was saying that this is going to cause hyperinflation, blah blah blah, and they're doing more than that now. First off, we have to understand what exactly does QE does. What is it? How does it affect the stock market? Because everyone says that the only reason the stock market has been going up since 2009 is because the Fed started QE and the Fed has your back. Everybody is so hyper focused on QE and what the Fed does, but does it actually matter? So what is QE? QE is when the Fed prints bank reserves and buys them from banks off of buys like any security, a treasury, mortgage-backed security, anything like that. It's just an asset swap between the bank's balance sheet and the Fed. This directly does not affect the stock market at all. You can say that it lowers interest rates, which would then make stocks more interesting. Okay, I'll give you that angle for now. You could also say that it encourages banks to lend more to hedge funds or other entities that are buying these assets. And yes, I will give you that. But directly, QE does not affect the stock market. The Fed is not out here buying stocks with newly printed bank reserves. And there's that new Russian lady that actually who just got appointed by Biden says she wants to control what stocks to buy and how much of them and then when to sell them. But whatever, that's not the point. That they don't currently do that with their mandate. So if you understand that, you understand it doesn't actually matter too much what how much QE is being pushed into the system.
I think it's also important to note, Josh, what QE is not, at least as it currently stands. And many people will, I think, falsely conflate QE with money printing, and that's technically not true because the bottom line is this. When quantitative easing is done, it's not necessarily putting more spending back or more spending power into the accounts of you, me, or the average consumer, the average business. What you're doing is just kind of financial engineering to make it theoretically easier for banks to lend more. Now, banks lending more in turn would, of course, create more money in the real economy. But QE by itself would not necessarily do it. I guess maybe when we say it primes the pump.
And banks aren't lending. We can see this. The reason why we're seeing this as an inflation right now is because the government stepped in. They issued bonds, and then the Fed bought those bonds, which is quote unquote money printing because new dollars now circulate in the economy. But when they do it with the banks, no actual money is being created. You need the banks to lend to the hedge funds or to lower interest rate. But let's kind of reboot that. I would agree now that the Fed is a much bigger portion of the actual bond market than it was in 2008, 2009. But as we saw in QE 1, 2, and 3, interest rates actually rose. So if quantitative easing was such a massive, powerful force that just drove interest rates down, then why would we see interest rates going up when QE 1, 2, and 3? It just shows that the private sector is much, much more powerful than the Fed. The longer QE goes on, the bigger portion the Fed will be of the actual size of the bond market. So this is definitely something to look out for. But right now, the private sector controls the bond market, and that is simple.
It reminds me of a quip that Jim Rickards always said that, if he was ever reincarnated, he wanted to be reincarnated as a bond vigilante because those are the only people that had any power over the Fed. So it's that sentiment has been expressed before.
Now that we understand what QE does, how is that? So then the stock started to rip because the Fed decreased their monthly asset purchases less than, or they're still doing more than expected. But what does this actually mean for the stock market? Why is it going back up? There's just it's mainly psychological. It's mainly the psychological impact that QE has, and that what the Fed statements have on the market that overwhelmingly drive the stock market. And I'll give you an anecdotal story. So I was on the phone with a pretty famous hedge fund manager's assistant a few weeks ago. And it was really when reverse repo was taken off. And I was talking to him about it and trying to figure out what was going on. His answer was, I don't really care what's going on because I know the Fed will figure it out. I know that they already have a solution. The consensus in the market is that the Fed is the all and knowing powerful creature and that they know everything. But what do we know? The Fed has never, ever, ever forecasted anything. Like, for the past decade, they've been saying we need 2% inflation. They're always under every single time. And they're always under. Now that inflation's starting to creep up, thank God we're finally getting above that 2% inflation. Oh, inflation's transitory. And will they be proven right? Probably not, because the Fed's always wrong. So we have the consensus that the Fed is so powerful, but they're never right. They don't do anything right, which is something that I find really interesting. People have way too much faith. But this also takes us to something else. There was a Zero Hedge article a few days ago saying that the market has priced in a 77% chance that the Fed hikes rates by June of next year. And this would just be mind blowing. That would mean they take their QE all the way down to zero and actually start increasing, selling bonds or raising interest rates on the short end. And I think if this would be very negative for gold, and this could be an actual reason why gold's going down. If the market believes that there's a 77% chance that the Fed's going to actually increase interest rates, then that is decreasing gold. But if you're someone like me who actually thinks that the probability of the Fed increasing interest rates is extremely low, then that is very bullish gold. Because if the market has that realization, then they're going to say, "Oh wait, inflation might actually be a lot less transitory than people thought, and it might be stuck here for a long time." That is when gold could really take off. Or this is something even more interesting. Joseph Wang just came out with an article saying that if the Fed increased interest rates, that could actually increase the amount of inflation, because usually the banks had to compete. They had to compete for deposits from other banks, and because they needed the reserves. But now, since there's such an excess of reserves, these banks don't have to compete with deposits. So if interest rates are rising, usually the interest on your savings account would go up as interest rates are rising. But what we could see, since they don't actually have to increase these interest rates, the interest rates on your savings account could stay low, but the interest rates are going up. And what would that mean? If the banks started to lend, then they would make a higher degree of profit with each actual loan that they give out, which would give them more incentive to loan it or buy treasuries, because they're creating a higher delta with each transaction, which means the Fed could be fucked if they raise interest rates with inflation. They could be fucked if they don't raise interest rates with inflation.
No, I got you. I think the only two comments I have on that front is that when I think about the Fed, I do not think the people at the Fed are fools. Like that's the first and foremost thing that I start with. I would also add that if I was an evil genius, the last thing I would want is people to think I was a competent evil genius. If you're competent and you're trying to do your own agenda, it's far easier for people to think you're a bumbling fool, because that way nobody will take you seriously, but you still have all the power behind the scenes. I view the Fed in that same light. I think they know far more than they let on, and I think it's far more advantageous because they have more room to maneuver if they think that if the perception is that they're relatively both impotent and geniuses at the same time. So I would say that they have managed that very well. The second thing I would say is when it comes to the lending for banks, Josh, just maybe some of what you said right there, is that banks will be incentivized to make loans because they can raise interest rates But the delta or the increase that the banks get in revenue from the interest of the loans that they make, they don't have to be passed on to the depositor base because there are so many depositors right now. In other words, it's pure gravy for them. And so therefore, if it's pure gravy to make loans, the banks are now financially incentivized to make loans. And if they do make loans, that means more currency units in the real economy, which suggests you might see inflation.
Yeah. So overall, I would say I am right now not doing anything drastic with my portfolio. I am averaging to long dated call options on gold and silver still. I am probably going to be taking profits on Zim soon. And that pretty much all I'm really looking for with this new taper is I want to continue to add to my gold and silver positions right now, as I think that they could be getting really ready for a bounce. I could be completely wrong, but that's why we play the game.